Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to The Naturalist Capitalist. I am your host, Reed Coverdale, as always, and I've got a special guest on the show today. I've got Livi McKay. How's it going, Livi?
Oh, it's going very well. It's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. So a lot of my followers are Tulsi supporters, so they might recognize you from the podcast that you did with her. But for those who don't, you want to just tell us your story, just what your activism is about and why you care so much about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a good place to start because my activism really kicked off with Tulsi. I have been a cannabis patient user, if you will, for over 10 years now, since I was 20, when I was in a F5 tornado in Alabama, and I lost my car and my apartment building was condemned, and I started having grand mal seizures about 3 weeks later. And so cannabis became one of those things that controlled my seizures, and then also just helped me with a series of other health conditions that I had, including, multiple surgeries and opioid use and so forth. And so cannabis has been kind of a lifesaver of mine multiple times over. But I've always lived in the South, so I've always been very quiet about my activism and about my use, or not even activism, about just my use. I had no activism. I was actually in finance and working for a hedge fund when I met Tulsi up in New Hampshire this past February. And it was really after that and into the coronavirus and all the things that just started happening that I kind of had to decide between, did I want to continue in finance and kind of do activism on the side, or did I really want to go, full in and actually start addressing this problem head on, not just from a purely nonprofit, like advocacy side, but also addressing it from multiple angles, from entrepreneurship, from business to the political side and so forth. So it's been an adventure and a journey, and that's how, we've gotten here so far, and taken a lot of different twists and turns as startups go. But now I think we've got a pretty good, clear vision ahead, and with the election and you seeing cannabis basically being undefeated. The only thing that was undisputed during this past election was that Americans are ready for cannabis, and they're even ready for even more plant medicines, as we've seen in Oregon and Washington, D.C. So we're excited about what we're doing and where we're going from here, and how the country feels towards these towards plant medicines.
Yeah, so you and I come from a very similar background. I was, I don't know if you're religious, but I was raised very religiously and very conservatively, and there were obvious views that we had about drug use in general, and I feel like that's a wall that a lot of people have. They don't even necessarily look into the benefits or the detriments of drug use. It's just a moral issue, and the door is shut right there. So how have you been able to talk with more conservative people down south? Has that been successful at all, trying to show them, look, this is more than just getting a high or something? This has so many other benefits beyond just the drug use application, medical, and then all the other areas of cannabis use too. Have you been able to break that wall down with conservatives at all?
Shockingly, yes. It has not been as hard people think, and I have been having private conversations, convincing Southerners that this isn't the devil's lettuce. I am religious. I grew up in a conservative Christian home. My mother was a prosecutor, specifically specializing in DEA cases. So I really had a 180 myself. So I knew how to address it with other people, because I went through that transition. And when really, for me, I'm like, would you rather me be on opioids, which I was legally prescribed to and certainly have a need for? I have a chronic pain disorder, Or would you rather me have this plant that, I'm actually able to have a very good life. I'm able to be productive when I wasn't on opioids. And a lot of people saw that difference. And so since it was kind of a show me, not tell me, um, I was able to, really didn't have actually as much pushback as you would think. Being able to also, look at be able to show them a career. Also, I'm an athlete and be able to show them, competition. I'm not lazy. I'm ambitious, kind of breaking the stereotypes around cannabis use. And that's actually led to even more conversations, like I said. And yeah, people have been far more receptive than I think perception, or I would say, yeah, the perception of it is.
Yeah, so people like me, I'm a truck driver, so I can't use any drugs, and I've never had any marijuana in my life, but I am a huge advocate for legalization. And one of the reasons is because the way the pharmaceutical industry pushes it down and keeps it from being successful, and other competing industries, it's a blatant example of crony corporatism and the stifling of competition and keeping people subjugated to medications that don't necessarily help them. They can just keep them subscribed to those pills their entire lives. I'd heard you talk about this with Tulsi a bit in your interview with her. You want to kind of dive into that and just the massive misinformation campaign that's put out about cannabis, and the government stifling of competition that has been paid for by corporations that don't want to have to compete with it?
Yes, this has been, I mean, it's no secret that pretty much everyone knows at this point that the reason cannabis is still illegal, especially at the federal level, is because of big pharma. And we know this to be the case because a lot of it has to do with their models are not set up to actually incorporate cannabis into their studies. So they would have to spend a whole lot of money that they don't want to spend. They would have to pivot their entire, systems, everything from their testing to their diagnostics to how it works with the FDA, because cannabis is just a completely different plant. It's a completely different substance from what they're used to dealing with. The compounds do not fit in their models. And so rather than actually, incorporate this somehow, or even just allow it to mature in its own way, they've certainly tried to stifle it. And I think that that's coming to an end. Because we're learning more and more about our own endocannabinoid system, and we're learning about, the problem is that, pharmaceutical companies, they pay for the med schools. They're the ones that are supplying what doctors know. And what's rather frightening is that most cannabis advocates and activists know more about endocannabinoid system than their general practitioners or their physicians and what have you. This isn't something that is readily discussed in medical schools, or at least it wasn't 20 years ago. I think it's getting more and more and more in the curriculum and in the vernacular. But until we have more education, more research opportunities, institutions, and so forth that are wanting to educate medical professionals, you're going to continue to see this pushback, because, what is happening is that you have everyday average people are seeing mountains and mountains of anecdotal evidence of cannabis treating, therapeutic cannabis treating everything from mild anxiety to insomnia, all the way up to, someone like me with cancer. I mean, not cancer. I'm sorry, I don't have that, but all the way with seizures and chronic pain and so forth. And so, when you have that wide a variety of medical conditions that this plant treats, people obviously become curious. And, people tend to be humble about not knowing, and they go to their doctors and they say, hey, can this work for me? And their doctors, not trying to be harmful. They just don't know. They don't know about the endocannabinoid system really that well because no one knows about it. It's not been heavily studied. The restrictive nature of cannabis being a Schedule 1 substance, remaining federally illegal and also being outlawed by the UN treaties of 61, 71, and 88. You've got just a massive suppression of research and information. And so therefore, there's a big disconnect between what patients are experiencing and how doctors can actually comment on it in an educated way.
Yeah, I think it would be useful for everyone to hear your personal experience a little more in depth, how you tried a bunch of different medications and they just didn't work, and how dire your situation was, and then that this really saved you in the end. I mean, if you're good with sharing those details.
Sure. Yes. So after the seizures in my mid-20s, I was, like I said, I had several 5 abdominal surgeries, plus I had a car accident where I compound fractured my femur, and so I have a metal rod from my hip to my knee. So I deal with a lot of chronic pain and so forth, and all of this happened in a really short amount of time. And in about 15 months, I was hospitalized 17 times. So they had me on close to a dozen prescriptions at any one time. That would be, from opioids to benzos to SSRIs, antidepressants, anti-anxieties. And then, those would be making me even more crazy. And so it was just pills on pills on pills. And then finally, by my 17th hospitalization, it was really becoming between life or death. I was in my mid-20s, like I said, and I had to choose between being an invalid and probably living a very short life, or drastically changing everything, because I was unemployed, I was struggling to stay employed. I was struggling to just live a normal life, and so I had to do something drastic. And cannabis was that thing that was able to get me off of Dilaudid after 4-week stint in the hospital, having it every 3 hours IV at very high doses. Cannabis got me off that in 10 days, which is pretty remarkable. And then, over the next few years, kind of steadily weaning it off to where I have no opioid use. I'm off of all of my pharmaceutical medications except a hormone replacement. And this is what's allowed me to go back to, I had like I said, made it to Wall Street, was running my own department, running my own department for a hedge fund, the investor relations. I was becoming a nationally ranked athlete. And all of this was with using cannabis secretly, and getting off of all those pharmaceuticals. So I know that my story, especially now having turned to activism as my whole life and my, basically what I eat, sleep, and breathe, I've seen just hundreds, if not thousands, of stories that are just like mine. People giving up 16 pills a day. The craziest one I heard was 44 pills a day. 44 pills a day, yeah, down to 0, replacing that with cannabis. So this is real. People are experiencing it firsthand, whether it's legal or not. Just like me, I'm just now living in a legal state for the very first time in my life. But it's you look at this past election, people are no longer buying it. They're wanting it. It all is happening through ballot initiatives, and so it's going to be something that is you can't put the genie back in the bottle. It's here to stay.
Yeah, so I don't think a lot of people realize that medicinal marijuana is still illegal in some states. What is the process like there? Do you have to go to another state to get treatments, or are you just treated as a criminal? Or what was the scenario like when you were living in a state where it wasn't legal?
It's a bit dicey. I would sometimes drive to a legal state. When I lived in North Carolina, I would drive to, of all places, DC, our nation's capital. And that was fine. But then when I lived in Georgia, that was a little bit tougher. And so I did have to resort to being on the black market. I was really upfront with a lot of, with my work about it, with, people around me. They're like, we know this is your medication. We know that you need this. But I'll tell you, there was not a time that I didn't, go to get that. I'm not going to tell you how I did it, but constantly terrified, terrified that I'm going to get caught, because anyone that tells you, that knows me, I'm the most anxious person. I'm so not cut out to being criminal. And so being a criminal for the past 10 years has not been good for my mental health. So I'm very glad to be in a legal state where I no longer have to worry about that, and I can just live peacefully and enjoy my medication without being fearful of going to jail.
Yeah, it seems like a reasonable request.
I
um,
know, crazy, right?
so, what is your strategy for outreach? Are you trying to get media attention? Are you talking to politicians on local or federal levels? What's the way that you're moving this message forward? What's your main goal?
So I will say we've had a major pivot in the past just week, given the election, given what's happened. I will humbly say that I got this wrong. I did not expect what happened to happen. I definitely thought we would be dealing still with President Trump's second term. So that did, make me go back and go, okay, where did what was I missing? What did I not exactly get right? And so that also woke me up to going, okay, I don't want to be dependent on whomever is in office or have that as my strategy. I want to be able to make a difference regardless and just go for it. So what was a social media, just social media movement, getting that kind of attention and talking to politicians, has now completely pivoted. We are now, what we're doing now is we're going to be starting an institution, an education research center that is going to be helping give some uniformity to the cannabis industry. And I can't say too much about that right now because it's in its very early stages, but that is going to be, on our for-profit side. So we're going to be going about the business of it. Like we said, given that, we had 5 new states come online with new cannabis laws, with 4 of them being rec and 1 being medical. And so, looking at those, realizing that this industry is in need of some standardization and some uniformity. And so we want to be able to start addressing those issues, as well as helping change this conversation. So we also do have another, I would say, a pivot to that is going to be an advocacy group that is going to be nonprofit, that's going to be a part of this research institute, that will be speaking on behalf of patients, and also advocating, educating, and just getting people the tools that they need to, if they want to speak with their legislators, they're more than welcome to. We're not going to be taking that much of an active direct role in politics, but we want to make sure that people are informed with all of the most modern, up-to-date research, and actually using the right language and using the right tools to actually make a change and to continue this momentum that we saw just a few days ago.
If it is federally legalized, the states will still have sovereignty on whether or not they want to legalize it themselves, right? So if you succeed at the federal level, is the goal from there to move on to the state level and just try to get everyone on board with this, wake them up to what reality is?
Yes, I mean, in a dream scenario, you have a federal legalization, again, where what we had envisioned was something where you have therapeutic cannabis being allowed to everyone. The reason you don't want it to necessarily go legalized all under medical is because if it's considered medical or medicine, a lot of times that will fall under the purview of the FDA and the DEA, and that just invites big pharma. No one wants that. But then again, no one wants to legalize recreational drug use. So where do you fall? So this was, we're trying to move to, like I said, change that conversation and looking at this recreational versus medical debate is very divisive, and it's quite frankly misrepresentative of how most adults partake in cannabis and use cannabis, and they use it for therapeutic purposes, whether that is to treat, like I said, mild anxiety, or even, appetite issues, what have you, that are somewhat more mild to more major health indications. They are getting a therapeutic benefit. Now, these things can be abused, but so can absolutely anything. But that doesn't not make it a therapy. And so we don't believe that anyone, regardless of their location, should be barred from a therapy that actually helps them. And so what we've envisioned is that we basically, if we could have it in an ideal world, is that you would have therapeutic cannabis available to all 50 states, and then the states would just decide whether or not that needs to be physician directed or whether it can be self-directed. So if that sounds very familiar, that is the recreational versus medical model. However, it's just put in a more accurate lens so that no president has to say, hey, I'm legalizing recreational drug use, but it also doesn't fall into medical where it falls under the purview of the FDA. This way, everyone kind of gets to be happy. It gets to go under a same model, but the language is just very, very important here. So we want to help, create that shift, create that mindset change, and get people using the terminology of therapeutic cannabis and really make recreational cannabis use kind of a relic, a thing of the past. That's the stoner pothead stereotype is really, it's done a lot of harm to the industry, and it's not, like you said, it's not very representative of your average cannabis user.
Yeah, so several states legalized, but Oregon was the most interesting state. They kind of went hardcore and just went for all drugs. I think there are certain limitations on how much you're allowed to have of certain drugs, but are you interested to see how that experiment goes? I'm very interested. I think it'll be successful, but that they're the first one to go that far. Do you think that the other states are kind of nervous, and after they see it play out, maybe they'll have a different opinion than they do now?
I think you hit it right on the head. I think, yeah, states are definitely nervous to see how that's going to play out, but I'm in 100% agreement with you. We have seen this play out already. This is very similar to the Portugal model, where we did see some really, really good success rates in Portugal in just over a decade, where they really turned around their opioid crisis over there, and their abuse and overdose rates were, have dramatically plummeted after doing something very similar. So I'm in agreement with you that I think we're going to see it be successful, and I think other states are going to hopefully follow suit. But I wouldn't hold my breath on any southern state doing that anytime soon. We're still trying to get them around to letting us have some weed.
Yeah, well, the North usually leads in this country anyway. But so what can people do to help you? Is there a social media page they can follow, or are there any sort of anything else they can do? Is there any sort of donation to this cause going on? What can people who want to get involved do?
Absolutely. So you can please join we've got a great Facebook group that has a lot of engagement. It's called the Tri-Peace Coalition. Please join our group. We have a lot of updates there. And then if you would like to donate to us, we have the tripeacecoalition.org. There's a GoFundMe as well as a PayPal, so you can have a direct donation there. And those donations, they go towards helping us really get our infrastructure. We've just gotten off the ground, so we're still getting our filings, our personnel, our marketing, everything kind of in alignment, so that we can really hit the ground running and take this seriously and make sure that it goes the way it's supposed to.
All right. The last thing I wanted to ask you about is kind of unrelated, but my fans here, or my followers, will really find it interesting. You worked on John McAfee's campaign for president in 2016. Could you just tell us a little bit about how that went? And then I want to hear what you think about the Libertarian Party at this point. You've already told me outside of this conversation, but I just want other people to hear your opinion too.
So yes, I did work for John. I did work on his campaign, and I also went and worked for him 2 years after, in helping him with his MGT Capital when he was CEO over there as cybersecurity turned Bitcoin company. So I spent a good amount of time with him, and I can say that he's a madman, that's for sure. But absolutely brilliant, and someone that I really do hold in a very high esteem. He's someone that did a lot for me as just personally, not career wise, not, I mean, as he did do things for me career wise, and he did do things for me on a superficial level, on a very personal level, he really helped me in a lot of ways. And so I think that while he is absolutely as insane as everyone thinks he is, I do think that he's pretty freaking amazing, and I really wish him well. I wish his wife well. Janice is someone that I also really love close to my heart, and I know that if anyone's been following his Twitter, his tweets from prison, I would hope that we'd all have that kind of attitude if we were in that particular state of mind. So that just shows you what kind of man he is. So I wish him all the best.
Yeah. All right. Well, I will put a link to the Facebook page, and we'll be following this event as it goes. I'll post updates now and then. I'll talk about it on this show. And I wish you the best of luck. I am 100% behind you. And thank you for coming on the show.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Reed.